Good day, everyone. My name is David Williams, Executive Director of the United States Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled The Wisdom of the Energy Economics Crowd. We are grateful to our moderator, Dr. Eric Hittinger from the Rochester Institute of Technology, and our distinguished panelists for addressing this timely discussion. First, a little bit about the United States Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest affiliate of the International Association for Energy Economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services that you can find on our website at www.usaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for our panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and type your question. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Eric Hittinger, visiting professor at the University of Lille in France and professor of public policy at Rochester Institute of Technology. Eric, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So let me introduce this webinar, our sort of special and different webinar, by explaining the idea. So I'll actually explain this with a short story of how this came to be. I was actually inspired to do this webinar years ago at a USAEE event. I was standing in the back of a giant room, and Adam Sieminski here was presenting the EIA Annual Energy Outlook. And people in the back of the room were sort of discussing what parts of it they thought were spot on and what they thought was wrong about it and what they thought the future of energy was going to look like. And it became an interesting debate in the back of the room, reflecting the projections that Adam was presenting at the front of the room. And I thought, boy, wouldn't this be an interesting thing to have as a group event where people could kind of interact and hear from experts, but also voice their opinion and interact with that. So what we have here is a series of questions that I came up with that I think are interesting questions about the future of energy. And I'm gonna pose those to the panelists here who have already seen the questions and have had some time to do their homework. But there also is going to be a poll involved for the audience to say what they think. And we get to see and compare the expert responses versus the audience, which is also relatively expert probably, and see how those compare. As far as the functionality of this thing, I want to note that the chat, the Zoom chat, is entirely open. Everyone can speak to each other. So in addition to the polling, if you have any points that you think the experts should raise or discuss, you'd like to hear discussed, or questions that are pertinent to the topic, if you put them into the chat, I, as the moderator, can bring them up to the panelists. So to that end, let's start with some demographic questions. So I'm going to launch a poll to the audience, and you should be getting a poll now that has 3 questions in it about who you are, what your area of expertise is, what sector of the energy industry you work in, and how long you've worked in the energy industry. And while you have time to answer those questions, I'm going to introduce our panelists. So going clockwise around the circle from myself, we have Sarah Ladislaw, who's a Senior VP, Director, and Senior Fellow at in the Energy Security and Climate Change Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Going around further, we have Dalia Patiño-Echeverri, who's the Gendel Associate Professor of Energy Systems and Public Policy at the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University. And we have Adam Sieminski, who is the President of the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center, or if you're in a hurry, the CAPSARC. You may have heard it referred to as CAPSARC, and who is also directly or indirectly the inspiration for this event. So let's see, we have we have a lot of poll responses, and so we can see who we have in the audience here. So I'm now sharing the poll responses, so everyone should be able to see who is in this audience. So we have a pretty good mix, strong in electricity, energy in the environment, but also petroleum and natural gas. Tilted a little bit more towards business and academia, but also a pretty good mix in government, consulting, nonprofit, and a wide range of experience. Although I noticed that nobody selected that they were just interested in energy. Everyone has some experience. I probably should have made the broken out the 20+ years bar there a little bit more. So apologies to those who said, "Hey, I want to show off my 30+ years of knowledge here." So let's step through into the questions. So let's see. If I share my screen, we should be able to go right to the first question. And so the first question is a very popular one. Everybody always wants to know, what will the oil price be in the future? So I started with this one. It's a popular question. It's basically impossible to answer, and I'm giving us a 5-year lead. So what will the oil price be in 5 years? And if you need a few assumptions, we'll call it the WTI price averaged over the whole year. I've also on the left put in the last 20-some years of WTI prices, which have been all over the map over the last 20 years. It's been a real adventure in recent history for oil prices, not to mention an adventure over the last 20 weeks for oil prices. So, where is this headed? I'm going to bring up the question for the audience. Let's see. So the audience should be receiving this as a polling question now. And I'm going to let my experts start in on answering this question. Where's the oil price going to be in 5 years? And why?
You want to pick on somebody to go first?
Oh, well, Adam, I mean, here, this is a very traditional, as the president of CAPSARC, this is probably something that's pretty relevant and of interest.
As the president of CAPSARC, I don't have a forecast, but as a personal.
Okay. I guess I shouldn't put you on the spot as the president of CAPSARC. But you have the background.
You talked about your poll of years of experience. I've been in this business for almost 50 years, but I claim to only have 10 years of experience, 5 times. So we get decadal moves in oil prices. The 70s was an uptick. 60s is actually flat. 70s was up. 80s was down. 90s was flat again. 2000s was up. The most recent decade was kind of a mixture of all of the above. Your prediction time frame was for 2025, so about 5 years out. And if you look back 5 years, prices for Brent have been as low as $21 and as high as $84. $52 is right in the middle. Turns out actually that's the World Bank forecast for the year 2025. And if I, in my experience, if you said what's the best thing to do is to pick a range, and it might be, a low of 35, a high of 50, that would be, or 70 rather, that would be about a 2/3 probability that it falls within that range. Let me just give you a number. I would opt for the slightly higher end of the range, so somewhere actually between 50 and 75, which is one of the forecast points that you made.
Yeah, just to add to that, if I can, Eric, I think I had the same issue where I really wanted to choose B and C. But that's not an option. So you have to pick one or the other. I do tend to think we experience periods of high oil prices when there's been periods of underinvestment for a while. And I think I'm going to be the economic doom and gloom person on this panel. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe my colleagues are doomier and gloomier than me. But I think we're going to have a significant hit to the economy for a period of time because of COVID, and so that's going to lead to underinvestment. And so once things pick back up, the question is 2025 is pretty soon, so it could still be in that very much lower for longer $25 to $50 range. But I'm gonna, when the sentiment is all saying lower for longer in chorus, then you say, well, maybe there could be a little additional price pressure in there. So I think 50 to 75 as well.
Sure.
I'd go with the 25 to 50. I agree with Sarah that the uncertainties, the irreducible uncertainties that affect oil demand, oil production, storage, and trade are really worse than ever at this moment. But I don't think prices will go above the 75, so that range is out of the case because of all the surplus production capacity in the OPEC countries, their ability. I don't think price will rise substantially either because of the prospects of unconventional oil in other places, including China, the capacity of the U.S. industry to respond to prices. So I think that I would have picked something around 50, but here is either 25 to 50 or 50 to 75. So 25 to 50 seems around right for me.
Okay. Yeah. So I did that on purpose. I was trying to be tricky and stick 50 right in the middle of two. So let's see what the audience says. This one, I guess, is maybe not too controversial. The audience is kind of the weighted average of what you guys said, although there's a few people up at the higher and lower ends. Yeah. So it's interesting. The audience, I guess there's more people who say it'll be above 50 a barrel in 5 years than less than 50, which seems to me, I don't know, optimistic about if you're in the oil industry, optimistic on the high end. If we do have a weak economy, that seems a little high. I don't know. Any other thoughts on that?
I mean, the world still uses oil at a rate of about 100 million barrels a day. It still covers 80% of its primary energy needs with oil. And none of that is going to change dramatically in the next few years. So that demand is going to remain strong. I also think, there has been demonstrated ability for the OPEC plus countries to adhere to their deals to cut production. So that will limit downward movements of this price. So I think low prices are not so likely, but anything can happen.
So I think what Sarah and I are looking at is something similar, which is the lack of investment in upstream that's taking place right now. Could in the medium term lead to higher than expected prices. That doesn't necessarily mean that they stay there, because as I said, the history is a lot of volatility in prices. Typically, I think people tend to go for mid-range kind of forecasts. Although I got to give you credit, Eric. You have 4 choices here rather than 5, so people have to go one way or the other.
Yes, you can't just pick the middle. Yes, I've been very strategic about the options. So, okay, well, it's funny. The one other question I was going to ask, maybe I should just wait until the next question, which is the EV question. So I'm going to stop sharing the results for this and share my screen again and talk about the question of EVs. So the second question for the panelists and the audience is, how many electric vehicles will be on the roads in 10 years? And so for assumptions, we're talking any type of electric vehicle. People tend to count plug-in hybrids when they are counting up electric vehicles, so we will as well. For scale, currently, or at the end of 2019, these things move fast, so I probably shouldn't say currently, but at the end of 2019, there were about 5 million electric vehicles globally. But the vehicle stock in the world is about 1,000 million, 1 billion vehicles total. So that constitutes about 0.5% of the global stock, and turnover is about 100 million a year. So it's about a 10-year turnover process for electric vehicles. So we're at 5 million now. Where will we be in 10 years? And I'm going to send the poll to the audience while the experts let us know the answer or speculate upon the answer.
So I'll go first. This one is easy. I think the more than 100 million is gonna be exceeded dramatically. So think about this. So about half of the EVs today are in China, about a quarter are in the US, and 5% in Norway, 5% in Japan, the rest in the other parts of the world. The US alone may have 18 million vehicles, but that doesn't take us to the 100 million or more. But China has a zero emissions vehicle mandate that was instituted just last year. And it now requires 12% of vehicles imported or produced to be electric. Now, this mandate is not the first thing they do. It complements other electric vehicles policies, such as subsidies, tax exemptions, heavy procurement of EVs from the government, license lotteries, that make it easier to own a car in cities like Beijing if you go electric, etc. So moreover, China, as other countries like Germany and India, has banned the sales of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030. So if you take China's production, which is about 28 million cars a year, right? 27% of the world. Take 12% of that in 2021 and grow that linearly to get to 100% in 2030. That alone gives you 150, 160 million. So that's so more than 100. I go with that.
Okay.
So maybe I'll take a second shot. I want to say that. That would be great. I would aspire. So I would choose between 25 and 100 million. And I think that there's a couple things. One, producing cars isn't the same as selling cars. And we are going to produce a bunch of cars. We have to sell them. So overcapacity issues in China right now in their new energy vehicle market is like really an issue. They have to figure out how to solve for that and make sure that people are purchasing those cars. And I don't think that they lack the will or the desire to do that. So that's fine. I would have probably been in a higher category, but I am worried about whether or not the sort of slump in vehicle sales, the economic downturn in the next couple of years, just like whether that just pushed things off by a couple of years and that pent up demand is going to come back, or it's, it's had some sort of longer term effect on people's ability to buy these vehicles. And I think it's come at an inopportune time where actually there was just going to be so many more vehicle models hitting the market and they were coming at different price levels, and it was going to be a really interesting experiment to see how much that enabled additional penetration. But it's coming during a time where like this is where my sort of macroeconomic outlook is swamping everything else that I consider, which is like, if we are on the tail end or the front end of a depression, this stuff's not happening. So that's what I worry about. So I'm just calibrating downwards a little bit because I'm really worried about the economic outlook.
Okay, before Adam, you say anything, let me share the results with everyone so everyone can see this and insert this into the discussion, although it's not wildly different from what you guys are saying. And also I can note there was a question in the chat about hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles and if that's relevant to this answer.
Yeah, the hydrogen fuel cells generally they're going to be a type of electric vehicle because the fuel cell produces electricity and the car runs on electricity. There's a really interesting thing here, Eric. You mentioned that you thought the existing stock of vehicles was about 1 billion. I've seen different numbers, maybe 1.2 billion or 1.3 billion. I think it depends on how you define the vehicles, light vehicles, and whether small trucks are in there or vans, that kind of thing, SUVs. But I'm I'm going to go a little bit more towards Dalia on this one. I mean, I think that the idea here is that the electric vehicles and plug-ins and hybrids and other types that are ultimately running on electricity, I think are going to grow very strongly. And I would come in at that above 100 million. You got to keep this in mind, though, that the total vehicle stock is going to be changing too between now and 2030. And maybe not so much in the OECD, the developed countries, but in the non-OECD countries, strong growth is expected. There could be 1 billion vehicles in 2030 just in the non-OECD countries alone. And most of those are going to be running on gasoline or LPG or diesel fuel, maybe natural gas. And so the point that I'm going to conclude on here is that even with a fantastic, strong growth in electric vehicles, you need petroleum liquids of some type, I think, are still going to be a significant requirement in the year 2030 to drive the existing and also new fleet of non-electric vehicles that will be growing between now and then. So there's going to be a room for electric vehicles for sure, but that doesn't mean that we can give up on hydrocarbon fueled vehicles.
I think it's important when talking about mobility to remember that there are all these other alternatives: electric buses, electric bikes, two-wheelers that go at 20 kilometers per hour or less, and these electric low-speed vehicles that are used everywhere in China, in the rural places and in the cities to deliver goods. So these are everywhere in China. China has more than 250 million electric bikes, 5 million low-speed electric vehicles. This is 99% of what it is in the world, but this is going to be adopted more widely in the non-OECD countries, Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America. This is a great alternative to conventional vehicles. They are not still electric vehicles, expensive electric vehicles, but they will probably carve a little bit of this demand. But I agree with you. We still will still depend on something else for transportation.
Let me just come back with a really quick comment, and that is that if your time frame was out to 2040, I would actually vote for a higher number for electric vehicles. I think that between now and 2030, the growth in the non-OECD countries is still going to be largely fueled by hydrocarbons.
Yeah, just to maybe add something, because I think, Eric, you were at their transition linking this back to the last question, which I think is I'm not sure that electric vehicle penetration is, particularly passenger electric vehicle penetration, is just going to have that big of an impact on oil prices. I think most, and particularly people who do forecasting, they've already worked most of this into their forecasts. It's other things that'll really sort of determine the price path of oil for the coming years. Particularly, just the basic question of whether or not Venezuela and Iran are back in the market, right? I mean, those things, they're huge swamping questions. So for this, what I do think is sort of an obligatory statement on electric vehicle charging infrastructure, right? What I find really interesting is the places, particularly in China, where they're really going out and making the enabling infrastructure possible, and so, or at least trying to. So I feel like those types of enabling infrastructure conversations are going to be really more and more important in a lot of different places. And so I think that that's a good point.
Okay. Yeah. Well, unless anybody has any pressing things, let's move on to the next question. So the next question is, what percent of the world's electricity will be produced by solar in 20 years? So IEA reports that global solar production was about 720 terawatt hours in 2019. but it's growing at about 35% a year over the past decade or two. I just want to note, I have at the bottom a plot of capacity of solar. And yes, I do know the difference between energy capacity and electricity production, but I couldn't find a good figure that I liked of energy production. And for solar, they scale pretty linearly. I just wanted to show this exponential trend. But solar is right now about 3% of electricity, but obviously growing really quickly. And what I want to know is, I love how I get to demand answers. What I want to know is, where will this go in 20 years? Or how long can this rapid exponential growth keep going? Because if you follow that trend out 20 years, you come up with a very large number, but perhaps there's various factors that are going to come in and slow down that trend and make increasing amounts of solar challenging. So what do the experts say?
Go ahead.
Eric, are you counting us as the experts, or is that?
Yes. Well, everyone. I'm clicking through to launch the poll at the same time. So in theory, I'm asking the audience at the same time as you, but yeah, who wants to jump on this first, and then I'll reveal the polls.
So I've always thought of myself as being that first question that you asked that the panelists can't vote on. I think of myself as being more of an oil and gas person than electricity, but looking at your 3% number now and the kind of growth that we could expect, Bloomberg, New Energy Finance, and they're fairly aggressive. I think they've got in 2040, that was your year, they have a number that's approaching 15 or 16%, I think. To me, one of the interesting questions is that what is not in your poll is what portion of total renewables is going to be solar. The Energy Information Administration always counted hydroelectric as renewable, and renewables were have been dominated by hydroelectricity, but hydro is shrinking, wind and solar are growing. By the time we get to 2040, I would think that it might be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 hydro, solar, and wind within the framework of renewables. So solar is probably going to grow faster than wind. The ability to scale that up, I think, is greater. But I would push for that number that's somewhere between 10 and 25%, and maybe towards the middle of that range.
I agree with that range. Maybe the middle, maybe 20%. As Ruichan from the chat reminds us, one thing is to add capacity, and we've been doing very good at adding capacity. The US just reached 84 gigawatts, adding almost 10% of that very recently. In Asia, the growth has been up at 64 gigawatts. China exceeded 200 gigawatts last year. It has also made significant progress on the installation of PV floating on lakes. So now those worries about solar PV competing with agricultural land or being a main cause of deforestation can be somehow appeased by these developments. But one thing is installing the capacity. The other thing is integrating that electricity. So even though China has this remarkable capacity, it is still a tiny, tiny portion of its electricity. Not only because coal is still king, but because there is a lot of difficulty moving this electricity to the consumer centers. So yeah, I think that mid-range in the 10, 25%, or maybe 20% is what we may see. And we have to remember, I mean, this is with the stated policies and the sustainable policies materializing, and the world reaching about 2/3 of the electricity production from renewables.
So people seem to be done with their voting. So I'll bring up the results here. So Sarah, you have the advantage that you get to quickly glance at the results before you.
No, it was exactly what I needed because I was feeling a little like I was being bullish. I mean, I still was in the 10 to 25% range, but sort of on the cusp. I thought 25% or higher could be possible, and for a couple different reasons. One, I do think that we are there are a lot of industrial strategy and a lot of industrial policy in some developing economies to try and sort of really amp up the role of solar PV. I think that there's two things that I'm very colored by this moment in time that we're in. When you have people who have to make capital outlay decisions on electric power generation facilities, like sometimes you don't want to build a giant, plant. Sometimes you want to build smaller things, especially when you're unsure of your economic outlook, and that's now. So and then it's an energy source that definitely benefits when governments are willing to back it. And I see that it could be one of the real beneficiaries of some of the green stimulus packages that we're seeing, because it's something people feel confident about. It's not a big bet. It's not like putting $1 billion behind DAC or something like that. I mean, it's really something you could do and you can deploy. So I kind of see both the economic context and the potential stimulus and government involvement context putting some wind at the back of solar PV, even beyond, what we thought from before. So I'm feeling a little bullish about it, I suppose.
Sarah, could I just add to your point that here in Saudi Arabia, there's a fairly ambitious program for renewable electricity looking out over time. One of the things, since Eric extended the time frame on this one to 2040, that's 20 years away, the potential for grid storage, large battery systems to come in and make renewables like wind and solar more competitive from a dispatch standpoint is there. And again, if you were going to lean a little bit, you might lean higher on the basis of improvements in battery technology, not so much car battery technology, but grid battery technology.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments that people want to throw in before I press on? Okay. So there was a request, someone in the audience requested to know what the number of participants is that are answering these questions. So most of these questions are getting 30 or 40 responses. So you can take that into account when you're thinking about the uncertainty in the polling. So let me go to my next question. I've tried to come up with questions that are a little bit challenging. So, when Adam mentioned the time frame of 20 years, I tried to think for each of these things, what's a time frame that is most interesting, most challenging to predict. But I like this question because, we spend a lot of time talking about these technologies that I might call future technologies. And I picked 4 things here, all of which people are talking about these days. And I've seen very different opinions from different people on each of these technologies, but all 4 of these are, if I dare say, basically trivial today. Carbon capture and sequestration for fossil fuels, we don't do too much of that. We're still in an experimental phase. Hydrogen as, maybe an energy storage technology, as a fuel for vehicles. There's a lot of potential opportunities for hydrogen in the future, but right now we don't have that except in a testing phase. Direct air capture of CO2, that's still being tested out, but some people are very excited about that as a potential business opportunity for the future. And small modular reactors for nuclear power. This is potentially a direction that the nuclear industry is going to move in the coming decades, though it depends on who you ask, of course. And so my question to everyone is, which of these 4 things that more or less don't exist as a business right now, which of these will be the biggest business in 20 years? And I'll let the panelists start talking, and I will send out the question.
I'm going to jump in because I feel like this was a mean question. I had a really hard time with it because, I mean, it's the revenue piece that makes it particularly difficult, which is, you know, because we usually measure and think about things in terms of like how much is being invested, right? Because these are technologies that we're trying to get into the market. So like which ones actually make money? You know, some of our industries wouldn't do so well by that measure today. So I guess this is a guess. I'm not bullish on SMRs. Sorry to my colleagues who focus on that. I think they're going to take a lot longer to get up and running and out there in a way that can prove their revenue stream. I'm going to have to go with CCS only because it's attached to a mature business around which, you know, so far, you know, the attachment with CCUS for the purposes of EOR has been the thing that has, you know, has sort of gotten this technology out there. I think that there is a big push to try and make sure that the CCUS sort of incorporation of CCUS technologies into different operations is going to not be just a loss, right? And so to the extent that it can contribute to a business that does have a positive revenue flow, I think that's how you would count that. And so I think that would probably be the biggest business subsector. I say that with a caveat, which is I don't know if in hydrogen here, you know, we have markets for hydrogen today. It is a business in and of itself. We just, you know, not for the purposes that we're thinking about it. So I don't actually know the size of that business, so I may just be discounting that. But that was my overarching thought. So I think I go with CCS.
I'll jump in and just note that direct air capture of CO2 is only going to work if you have carbon sequestration, unless you can find some way to reuse or recycle that CO2. And even hydrogen, if it's green hydrogen, you need electricity, and you'll get, you know, water and not CO2. But if it's blue hydrogen, hydrogen produced from hydrocarbons, you're going to have to do something with the carbon dioxide as well that you're going to get off of that process. So that really does kind of point to CCS as one of these. It would be interesting to, you know, I think this would actually take some work along the lines of what Sarah was suggesting in terms of really knowing more about the potential market. You could probably spend a lot of money on small modular reactors if they were available. And 2040 is enough time that you might actually begin to bring that technology in. And this is Sarah, your point about this being a tough question. This is one where I wanted all of the above.
Yeah.
I agree that all of the above will play a role in 2040, but I think I have no doubt that it will be CCS, the biggest sector, for the reasons mentioned, but also because CCS can be a substitute for battery technologies when it comes to integrating renewables. You can have flexible operation of CCS to regenerate. When you have post-combustion CCS, you can regenerate your amine when there is excess renewable electricity production, and then just hold on and just output more electricity when you have still capturing the CO2 when you have a shortage of electricity. And you also have an increased flexibility of these plants. They can ramp up and down faster, so they can help accommodate fluctuations in renewables. So that's one reason. But maybe if you don't buy that one, there is this other one, which is the ALAM cycle. So the ALAM combustion cycle that runs on CO2 as the working fluid, an oxy-combustion cycle that promises to have zero emissions, you know, no CO2, no NOx, no SOx, very low water consumption, low capital cost and operating costs, low footprint, can work with coal, can work with natural gas. There is pilot plant in La Porte, Texas of 25 megawatts. They are now citing their 300 megawatt. So if we have that's really a path-breaking technology that enables, again, using coal and natural gas and capturing CO2 at a low cost. So CCS will be, you'll have it for EOR, but you also have just CCS to reduce emissions.
I'm looking at the poll results, and it's really pretty interesting how hydrogen has come up really, really strongly in the poll results. And maybe we have a bunch of refinery people on this call, because hydrogen is already a fairly big business in the refining sector. And I think, we've all kind of alluded to trying to look at what the underlying base level of business is in each of these areas. And hydrogen is probably pretty clearly the biggest of all of these sectors at this time.
Yeah, so there's a couple comments. One of them was, Gherkin actually mentioned that he would naturally go with CCS, but he's concerned that there wouldn't be much policy support, that there seems to be a lot more policy excitement about hydrogen. And so he picked that instead. And he also mentioned, the challenge of finding sites for CCS.
I think I was looking at that, and I think that those two are very good points. I mean, I think there's two giant caveats on the hydrogen side. One is what Adam just said, which is hydrogen could very well just be a very large market. I don't know what the revenue is on hydrogen today. So it is a market unto itself. I just meant, from going forward for other purposes that we were talking about, cultivating a new hydrogen market. I am surprised by the response, only because from everything I know, hydrogen is one of the least economic options we have out there right now in terms of the way that we're going to need to be using it. And so it's on a longer glide path. I mean, maybe people think we're going to make a lot of progress by 2040, but as a revenue generating sort of, energy solution, I'm just not sure it's completely at that phase of development, but maybe I'm too conservative on that. I do wonder, whether or not we're just in a hydrogen moment, right? Everybody's putting out plans. I worked at DOE when we had a hydrogen roadmap. It was very, everybody felt very positive about it, but then it went away, and then not a lot happened for a very long time. So, I think that there's I think what's happened is policymakers have awoken to the idea, and companies have awoken to the idea that we do need hydrogen as a solution, and they had better get about the business of figuring out how that makes it into the mix. That is a long way off from actually making that happen. And so I was at a conference that MIT was doing on hydrogen late last year, and the thing that gives me the most hope is that a lot of industries and governments see strategic opportunity in making this market, and so I think that is very bullish. But I do kind of consider us to maybe be hyping that a little bit, because there's just been so much recent policy focus.
Okay. So let's press on to the next question. So again, more.
Yeah, I was
just
going to say, someone said that it wasn't clear that CCS would also play a role for enhanced oil recovery or EOR. But I think that's another thing that could play a role. This is thinking of negative emissions from oil production, which CCS can enable, right? So you inject more than what you burn out later. And that's an interesting thought that could also boost the chances of CCS being a larger sector than the other ones.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So let's press on to the next question, which is about what's the primary energy carrier going to be in 30 years? So we're going further out into the future now. Right now, most of the end use energy we deliver is in liquid fuels. It's almost half, right? So we're using liquid fuels, of course, for transportation, as well as a few other things, for the consumers of fuels. Electricity is obviously a big energy carrier for end use. And then the remaining 30% is covered with natural gas, which is used a lot for heating and industrial uses, and coal, which is used more for industrial uses and some heating. So, but this could all shift around, right? Are we going to continue the way we are? Are we going to electrify everything, as the phrase goes? I want to know, is this going to continue with liquid fuels as the dominant energy carrier that people consume, or are we going to move to electricity or to hydrogen, or I put in a something else category? I don't know what it would be, but if people have thought of another energy carrier, pure uranium passed around from wallet to wallet, I don't know. So what do you guys say?
I have to go with electricity. And this is also aspirational. I do hope we get to electrify, and we electrify with renewables and low carbon or zero carbon electricity. So yeah, I'd say electricity growing is 25%, that is today, to surpassing liquid fuels.
I guess I'll jump in and looking at my old organization in Washington, the Energy Information Administration, has end use consumption in 2050 by fuels, and it's important, I think, to kind of look at how you're defining the question. Oil and liquids contribute the most right now to end use. And given the momentum of consumption that we talked about earlier, particularly in the non-OECD countries, and growth in transportation, not just light duty vehicles, but trucks, aviation, marine transportation, I think that the chances that petroleum is going to still continue to grow, even out to the year 2050, is real. I think it could level out and come down in the developed world, but in the developing world, I think it's growing. Electricity is, I mean, I agree with Dalia. Electricity is growing very rapidly. Natural gas is growing fairly rapidly too. Renewables as an end use are also growing rapidly. But when you look at the overall picture in the year 2050, EIA has electricity and natural gas about tied for 150 quadrillion BTUs apiece. They actually have coal picking up towards a little bit. I would disagree with that. I think coal is probably going to be falling with renewables and electricity, lower carbon fuels, including lower carbon oil, which is possible, picking up. So I'd say oil is still the largest carrier. In the EIA's number, and I'm back to primary, it's not half, but it's more than a third of the total of end use consumption.
Okay, I'm going to share the results here, so Sarah gets to see these results before jumping in.
Yeah, this worked in the opposite direction for me this time. So I want to say electricity, and if you look at where we need to be, that's the right answer. I think the thing I worry about is when you add up transportation and industrial demand, and you really take a hard look at how quickly we're going to be electrify the things that are growing in those sectors and displace existing capital infrastructure. Even a 30-year time frame is hard, and I think it'll take policy measures. So I'm hopeful that this answer is correct. I would say, even if I just sort of discounted with all of those caveats, I would say electricity should at least get on par with liquid fuels by that time. Whether it can completely overtake them, I think we just will need to have much more aggressive electrification policies.
Okay. Any last Any last comments? I'm surprised. Honestly, I'm surprised that electricity was so strong. Maybe it's
I was
in.
gonna say you should be able to answer too.
Oh, I'm trying to stay out of it.
No,
I
you
don't
know
know.
some stuff.
I think one of the challenges is do you
Eric,
answer these
Can you
questions?
bring up the results of your poll of what sectors are represented on the call?
Yeah, we did. I can look into whether I can bring that up, but it was a decent amount of electricity folks.
Yes, it was.
and some energy and environment category folks.
Right.
And then a little bit smaller section from oil and gas.
Right.
And then a mix other than that. So maybe these are the electricity folks being aspirational, but I think that's one of the challenges of these questions, especially for you guys who have to answer it, is, as Sarah kind of described, you answer it the way you sort of hope it would be, the way you're trying to push the world towards, or do you answer honestly? And actually on that topic, shall we press on to the next question, which might be our last one? And that is the CO2 question. So what will global CO2 emissions be in 2040? So 20 years from now. Right now, depending upon whether you're counting CO2 emissions from fossil fuels or total emissions, it's around 40 gigatons a year, give or take. So this figure that I'm showing is just from fossil fuels, so it's a bit higher if you count everything, deforestation and all that. And one of the interesting answers to this question that is somewhat useful is this figure from our World in Data, where they looked at what emissions trajectories we'd have to follow to keep onto a 2 degrees C pathway. And one of the neat things, if you look around the year 2040, they all line up. So no matter what path you think we're on, if you think we're on a 2 degrees C path, the answer is a little bit less than 20 billion tons of CO2. But are we? There's a tough question. Are we on that path, and where will we be? So I will send that question out to the audience and ask the panelists at the same time.
I cannot avoid being aspirational. So as you showed, we know that having an average global temperature of 1.5 C above is dangerous, and having it above 2 C is catastrophic. We've seen it this summer, and the only way to reduce that risk is to reduce emissions. We need to cut the emissions by half by 2030, and we need to cut them to 0 by 2050. And 2040, we are really risk averse. So I say less than 20 gigatons. They have to be less than 20 gigatons if we are going to have a future.
The International Energy Agency's sustainable development scenario is about 16 gigatons in 2040, and so that kind of fits in with the idea of less than 20. Just keep in mind, Sarah mentioned policies earlier. The stated policy scenario is closer to the 35, which is kind of where we are now. So you're not making a lot of progress with the stated policies. So you need policy, you need technology breakthroughs, you need investment. I think I'm going to take the opportunity to just mention very briefly the idea of the circular carbon economy, that you need all 4 of the options. You need reduce, which is efficiency and other fuels, renewables, and so on. But you need recycle and reuse, back to that hydrogen, and even the CO2 questions, finding ways in the chemical industry to reuse and recycle carbon dioxide. And then finally the remove option. And we had people looking at the CCS option versus hydrogen, but again, even hydrogen at scale is probably going to require storage. Your question doesn't say whether those numbers are net or gross, and there's very little difference between net and gross for right now. but there certainly could be in the year 2050. And I would argue that what we should be looking for is advancing, across all of these options. I mean, this is truly an all of the above kind of thing. We need to be using every tool in the toolkit, and we need serious technological advancement in all of these areas, including biological storage. I mean, I'm not ruling anything out. That's the whole point of the idea of the circular carbon economy is all options need to be addressed, because the problem, as you're seeing here, is big enough that if you don't use all of the options you have available, you're just not going to make it.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that the panelists have said so far, and I agree with the poll results. So listen, we need to go to less than 20. We know that. But to be honest, analytically, we're not doing what it takes. Now, that doesn't mean we're not doing we're not doing anything. I think we've actually made some really important progress. And I think if we keep going and try a little bit harder, we can actually make a lot more progress. I just feel like, if I put myself in the position of a policymaker, understanding what trajectory we're on and what progress we've made so far, the most honest answer is we'll probably make more progress, but we're probably not going to move fast enough. And so if you have to think about what that world looks like, you need to plan for that world. And this is something that's actually come out quite clearly in the sort of post-COVID scenarios. Like, there's what the world should do, and then there's what the world is doing. And you don't have the luxury as a policymaker of just sort of thinking, okay, well, we'll get back on track at some point. Well, right now, things aren't going well. And so, yes, we should use that as an impetus to do more. But I also, we also can't say, no, because we have a plan for 2050. We've taken care of 2050. Well, that's fine. You can have a plan for 2050, but today is, 2020. And if you're not doing the things to put that plan in place, it's not like something's miraculously going to pop up at 2040. So I do think that the poll answer seems about right to me. That's not where I think we should be, but I do think it's hopefully where we're at least headed, given what we're trying so far.
So Sarah, maybe I'm going to try to be like Dalia, a little aspirational here, and that if the poll results are accurate, I mean, if that's a forecast, maybe we can hope that we're at the lower end of that range of 20 to 35 and not towards the upper end.
That would be very nice. Yep.
Yeah.
I agree.
Were you going to say something, Dalia? Or should we close it on this high note?
No, I was just gonna say 20 years from now is a lot of time, and a lot can change 20 years from now. The people making decisions 20 years from now, well, 10 years from now, so that in 20 years from now things have changed. It's gonna be different. And right now there is a search for creative ways to reactivate the economies, to employ people that are losing jobs, that are not going to come back. So if we look Greece, for example, a country with a difficult economic situation was able to go to ditch coal completely very recently. And so I think there are reasons to be optimistic and also reasons to work hard to make that vision happen.
Awesome. Great. Actually, I'm glad that you gave us that more optimistic comment to close rather than a slightly more pessimistic one. And I want to thank Dalia for that comment. Thank all of our panelists for coming out, for putting yourself out there. So I'm sure in 5, 10, 20 years, you'll start getting angry emails of how wrong you were about a forecast you made on a webinar in the year 2020. I'll hide out under a rock. But I'm going to hand things back over to Dave to close out the webinar.
Thank you, Eric. and good to end on an optimistic note for sure. Wow, this has been really enjoyable. Thank you very much, Eric, and to our distinguished panelists for an outstanding webinar. This really has been enjoyable. I hope we can do more of these like this, because the interaction, the play that is happening with our our participants is truly valuable. For all those of you listening, this webinar will be archived and on our website later on this afternoon. Please share it with your friends and colleagues. If you're not a member of USAE, we do invite you to join by visiting us at usae.org. Wish you all a wonderful coming weekend here. Thank you again for attending, and I officially close this webinar. Bye now.